Welcome to Upthinking Finance, a podcast that offers a unique and discerning view of economics and financial planning. Here are your hosts, Emerson Fash and Amy Lenoble.
Welcome to another episode of Upthinking Finance. Philosopher Seneca once said, deliberating is not delaying. It's also my pleasure today to welcome my business partner and friend, Amy Lenoble, who will be co-hosting with us today.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for joining. This is another Step 1 episode. It's our series for the younger generation, just topics that we feel are very pertinent and very active today. And homeownership is one of them. It's something we hear a lot about from clients, whether it's parents trying to assist their children or just younger generations preparing for their futures. And for many young buyers, purchasing a home takes far more planning, far more saving and strategy than it did even just 50 years ago. So today we really hope to talk about the reality of the journey and some things to expect and consider when you're contemplating a home purchase.
So let's start with the basics. Should I purchase a home? And that answer, of course, is going to be different for everybody. And hopefully what we're going to be able to do is help each of you get to a point where you feel comfortable with your decision. So first thing, let's look at kind of the economics behind the decision. And as you can see here on this graphic, for those of you who are watching, median home prices are very expensive across the country. Currently in California, no surprise, the average home price is $825,000. The lowest, the most affordable place to live would be in Alabama, which is $220,000. Why are these kind of prices a problem? Well, the reason is because, as you can see here, the relationship between household income and house prices has diverged over the years. So over the last 40 years, back in 1985, the average home price was $83,800. The average income at that time, household income, was $24,000. Fast forward to 2025, and the numbers are now with an average median home price across the United States of $427,000 with an average household income of $84,000. So the difference is that gap, which used to be 3.5%, has broadened to 5.1%, or in number terms, incomes have increased 250%, but home prices have jumped to over 400% in the last 40 years. Where does that leave people? Well, that leaves a lot of people priced out of the housing market. Nationwide, 65% of the households can't afford to buy a new home. In California, it's 66%, but in places like here in Montana and then in Wyoming, 82% of the population in those states cannot afford to buy a home. In fact, interestingly, and this is no surprise because of these numbers, Realtor.com just published a study a month ago that said that 1 out of every 3 adults under the age of 35 lived at home with their parents in 2025. And it's not because they didn't have a college education. It's not because they didn't have a job. It's because what they lacked was an affordable home to be able to buy. So these are some issues. Now, for those of you who can't afford to buy a home, it's important to know that there are other expenses that you have to be aware of and factor into your decision. Basic things like maintenance fees. Some people would prefer to have a landscaper, maintain their home. If you have a pool, there's maintenance there, different utility costs depending upon where you live. But there's other things too, like property taxes and homeowners fees. And homeowners fees, a lot of people typically associate with condominiums. But actually, nowadays, many home developments have HOA fees as well. And what do they cover? Well, typically basic things like common area maintenance, landscaping costs. Some developments or complexes have a fitness center or a pool. In fact, we rented a place or owned a place once that had a doorman. All these things are covered by association fees. The national monthly average cost is somewhere between $240 to $290. In California, of course, it's more expensive. It's anywhere from $360 to $387 a month. But that's not the only fee that those are base covered fees. There are also what's called special assessments, and those can cover unexpected and unbudgeted items. For example, here in Montana, in our development, we had to put in another fire hydrant in order to make sure that the development was up to code with county and regulations in terms of being able to make sure that people's houses would be protected. So that was a $5,000 check that nobody expected to have to write. The other thing with HOA fees is they can go up. They can increase typically 3 to 5% a year. But interestingly, many associations can legally increase those costs year to year by 20% without getting a vote from any of the members. So these are things, again, you want to just consider and plan on so you've got cushion to absorb these other costs that maybe you didn't anticipate. Property taxes was another thing, and I'm going to show you right now an example of a property tax bill. And I think it's fair to say that the term property tax is a bit of a misnomer. If you actually take the time to look at what's on a property tax bill, you can see here, there's the library fund, the rest home fund. This is at a property in Montana, but a third of this is taken up by school expenses. And so anytime anybody, you vote every November in an election and you vote for these bond issues or they get approved, if it's not a revenue bond that's covering the cost, a lot of times the bond payments end up on your property tax bill. And again, there are also special assessments that can be thrown on that the city or the county you live in adds on to these costs. So this is another expense to be aware of, but it's also another expense to be aware that's going to continually go up every year. Now, so these are things not to scare anybody, but again, we want everybody to go into these decisions with their eyes open. Now, a big issue is that comes up in discussions Amy and I have is, okay, well, how long are you going to be in the property? And that can be a deterrent for some people. Back when I started buying property, there was kind of a mindset where, okay, we'll buy this and start off, and then the price will go up and we'll roll it into the next big thing. And the next thing is, kids came along and whatever, how life changes happened. That dynamic has changed. And so, but sometimes in response to that, well, if I have to move in 2 years, I'll just rent it out. Well, let's dive into that a little bit. In Long Beach, California, the average rent, according to Zillow in 2026 for a 2-bedroom condo is $2,500 a month. Okay. According to Redfin, the average cost for a 2-bedroom condo in Long Beach is $500,000. So simple math, just, annualize the rental income divided by the value of the property, and that's about a 3.6% rate of return. However, that's before all the things we just talked about: maintenance costs, utilities that the landlord may cover, mortgage payments if there's still debt against it, the property taxes. And if you don't want to be the person getting the phone calls that, on a Sunday afternoon or, at midnight that there's plumbing or electrical issues, a lot of people hire a property manager and they typically cost 10% of the monthly rent. So again, it's not as easy as it may sound. The other thing is, and particularly for people in California, most people aren't surprised by this, but the landlord laws are very heavily leaned towards the tenant, meaning there's caps on how much the rent can go up each year. There are very stringent rules on security deposits. And the biggest one is actually, if you have a problem tenant, how you get them out. And there's a complicated legal process that requires just cause that all has to go through the court system, and that can take up to 3 months, and sometimes can result in the landlord actually having to cover relocation costs for the tenant. So again, it's not necessarily as easy as it sounds. The last part relating to economics would be lending. And sometimes, we're all human, we can get just locked into an idea, I've got to have this place. And although I can't afford it, is there a way that I can't afford it? And sometimes people will take on variable mortgages. Variable mortgages start off at a very low rate that at the time can make the property affordable. But after the initial lock-in period expires, which can be, maybe up to 5 years, the loan can start going up. And typically over the life of the loan, the increase from your initial starting rate can be as high as a 5 or 6% increase over that, which means if you started at a 5% rate, you could end up having a 10% rate at some point during the life of the loan, which means your payments have doubled. So we don't make recommendations here, but it's really, there's not often a circumstance where that's going to be beneficial to somebody. So anyway, these are some things to think about relating to the economics of buying a home.
Yeah, thank you. So framed around economics, we can see that home ownership is definitely something that requires prudence and strategy and financial planning. And it's definitely something that can be endured. And I kind of wanted to talk about the psychological aspect of home ownership, just from a different angle that I hear from a lot of my peers. my friends and younger clients, that I just want to address. So, before you make a permanent commitment, it's good to self-reflect on the intention, which is just the basic question of, why do you want to own a home in the first place? And again, there could be many good reasons, but for a lot of people that I personally encounter, the desire to own a home isn't solely a personal aspiration. It can be very much shaped by family expectations, cultural norms, social media, the belief that home ownership is like the definitive marker of adulthood and success, and it defines your identity. And, that's a different story. But before you make one of the biggest financial decisions of your life, it's very much worth asking whether the goal reflects your own values or whether you've inherited someone else's definition of what a successful life should look like for you. It kind of goes back to that quote, we're not delaying anything, but we're deliberating. It's important to think about this because these are the things that are going to get you through kind of the factual economic reality of today. So from a psychological perspective, homeownership can represent security, identity, accomplishment, or belonging. And some people genuinely thrive with the stability and freedom that would come from owning a home. And that's wonderful. Others might find that flexibility, mobility, or investing in experiences like travel aligns more closely with what would bring them fulfillment, like going to concerts, taking sabbaticals. I have a cousin who takes 1 month sabbaticals and goes and travels. The healthiest decisions tend to come from understanding your own motivations rather than reacting to the external pressure. And so, maybe instead of asking, should I buy a home because it's the next milestone, a more meaningful question would be, will owning a home support the life I actually want to build? And that's the question. And when the financial decisions, I can just say as being in this field, both Emerson and I, when the financial decisions are aligned with the personal values, not just outside expectations, they're more likely to contribute to long-term well-being, not just potential financial outcomes. And I just want to be perfectly clear. It is more than okay for a young person, single or married, kids or no kids, to desire being a homeowner, despite the reality of economic hardships today. But it is part of our fiduciary responsibility to enlighten people about the difficulties of sticking to a financial plan when the foundation of that plan isn't sturdy or clear to begin with. So self-reflection is key. And I want to go into another question we get asked a lot. Now that we've addressed some facts and self-reflected values, there's kind of a counter argument or a question that arises when someone mentions not wanting to be a homeowner. There's a little bit of shame attached to it too, in my personal experience as a young adult. And that's like, well, is it okay to rent forever? People kind of throw that back at you. Or I have a family member who says, rent is something you collect, as a different generation. So is it okay to rent forever? Well, the answer is that it depends. How are you trying to build your life? As previously noted, homeownership is not the only marker of financial success, and renting is not automatically a sign that you're falling behind in some way. So the decision is much more than income or debt or what a spreadsheet says you should do. It's about goals, lifestyle, how you want your money to work for you. Again, for some people, owning a home provides stability, the opportunity to build equity. It's a sense of permanence. And for others, renting offers flexibility, fewer responsibilities, freedom to direct my money toward experiences, travel, or other investments and priorities that matter more to them. And so the best financial decision isn't, and I might say never, is one that follows tradition. It's one that aligns with your values and supports the life you actually want to live. There's pros and cons to renting. There's pros and cons to homeownership. There's pros and cons to investing and saving. We could run various analyses that would show it's better to buy if you live somewhere long-term. It's better to rent if you move periodically, or there happens to be a pandemic when you're trying to sell your home. And there's all these what ifs. The financial plan that works isn't one that can be dependent on those assumptions. It's one that is adaptable and an assistant to personal ambitions, because the truth is we don't know. I can't predict the next pandemic. If it were up to me, there'd never be another one, So it's just the reality. And I'd like to show a chart of what it's like to rent in America right now. This chart, as you can see, it's based on location. It's looking at all of the nation and kind of giving you the cities. The ones in red are the most expensive to the blue, the least expensive. And you can see it's close to $4,000, a month. It's like $3,800 a month is one of the most expensive for renting. And so we also just wanted to say, again, because this is an all-inclusive podcast episode of just what are all the options, there's alternatives that many people are considering today to renting. So if you don't own a home or plan to, renting's not your only option. People are buying tiny homes. People are engaging in RV living or boat living. I have a couple friends who live on their boat, and it's beautiful. They're here in Long Beach. Those are for people who desire mobility. You've got people co-buying homes with their friends. There are people having ADUs, that's an accessory dwelling unit, put on their family's land so that families can remain close in proximity. And these are all very practical alternatives to homeownership that exist today that don't include just renting an apartment for $4,000 a month, which again, you can do if you'd like. But these things should be included in the conversation as well when you're considering your future living space. So I guess basically there's no one size fits all answer to the hot topic of homeownership in 2026, but there is a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of considerations and strategies that I know Emerson and I are more than happy to help with should anyone be searching for financial guidance in this area.
Amy, you're right. There are so many different things that go into making the decision to buy a home that go beyond just the finances and economics of things. I want to end my part with a real just quick little story. For those of you who can see this, this is a graph of a home I grew up in beginning in junior high school in 1975 that my parents bought up in Lancaster, California, which for anybody who's not familiar with that, that's called the High Desert. That's in Antelope Valley, which is about an hour north of LA. They bought a house brand new for $58,000. Over the years, it's slowly appreciated as most houses, do, particularly in California. And today it's worth about $560,000. Now that may seem affordable. I mean, this isn't beachfront property, but interestingly, even that little house in Lancaster appreciated over 865% in 50 years. The challenge and the problem with that is that incomes have only gone up 400%, less than half, and that's the issue. Even for a small house up in the desert in California. The point of this is it's really important for people in my generation that started buying houses, back, say, in the mid to late 90s, to understand that the economics and dynamics are not what they were when we started getting into the housing market. We had a declining interest rate environment that began in the late 70s that extended all the way through into COVID, which made financing a lot easier, but more importantly, directed a lot of investment dollars into the stock market and into real estate, which is a big reason why these prices have grown so much and really have this disparity with income. A client and friend of mine who's, my age, we're both born the same year, once said that he felt we were living in a very sweet spot in history. And I think it's important, again, for us to remember that because it's not as easy for younger generations to buy homes today for all the reasons we've discussed. And I feel like we need to be sensitive to that.
Yeah, amen. Thank you for your sensitivity. I feel so seen and validated. If I were going to end with something, I would say there's just no control. Nobody has any control over the time they were born and when they came into this world and the economics of today that affect them. So again, your dreams can absolutely become a reality, and they just take deliberation. So we say deliberate, deliberate, deliberate. We can make it happen if it's something that we really want, that brings value. And so that's what we'd like to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining Upthinking Finance.
Emerson Fersh and Amy Lenoble are registered representatives, and securities and advisory services are offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and the companies they represent are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Capital Investment Advisors, LLC. Individual tax and legal matters should be discussed with your tax or legal expert. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. There is no assurance that the techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of the strategies. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal.